Hey everybody, doing another skill breakdown today, only a few left to go. This time I'm covering the Faerie Knight, who's another one of those characters that I thought I did one of these for already. It's hard to keep them straight sometimes. But Faerie Knight is a story unlocked character that you can unlock in Act 3. You will have the choice to choose between either himself or Sir Gawain. And unless you're doing a Christian run, Faerie Knight is going to be the choice for you. He is definitely the stronger option. What's really cool about the Faerie Knight is that even though he is an Arcanist, he plays very weirdly. He kind of almost feels like his own sort of class with sort of Arcanist elements built in there, but he's very flexible in terms of what he can do and what role he can fill in on your team because of his weird skill tree. So there's definitely a lot of unique abilities for this class to kind of go into and give my take on what I think is probably going to be a good choice for him and explain how they just work overall at a base level. In Tier 1, as always, we have the basic attack, and it's a unique basic attack. Only Faerie Knight has this, and it is Lightning Strike. It is a 3 AP attack for 75% weapon damage. And you'll notice here that it has a range of 2. We'll get to that later. It does not start with that. It has a base range of 1. But 75% for 3 isn't, a great percentile amount, but it's a cheap cost. But you have to keep in mind that you are going to be using Arcanist Staves, which have pretty high base damage on them. So 75% is actually pretty good, especially once all the bonuses come into effect, and you'll be doing some decent damage with this. The upgrades on it, Greater Lightning for 15%, so now you're up to 90%, so that's great. And probably the best upgrade on it is Shocking Blast. Now Lightning Strike also applies shock to the target. So if you're using Faerie Knight in a sort of defensive role on your team, sort of a tank, you can, set shock on a bunch of different targets and have one of the strongest debuffs in the game to hamper their turn. For the next upgrade of Overheat, Lightning Strike does an additional 20% weapon damage if the target has armor, so that's going to have really high uptime. There's a lot of enemies with armor, so unless you're using him as sort of an assassin, sniping, archers in the back, you'll probably get this on most of your hits. And then lastly, Lightning Child reduced the cost by 1. Honestly, I think at a 4 AP cost, it's still fairly fair, but at 3, it's great, and definitely an upgrade you're going to want to take. He has a pretty standard ability up next in Tier 1 for Arcanist, Blood Hex. I personally don't really use this a whole lot with him, just because the playstyles I like to use him for, he isn't really using a whole lot of his hexes, so you're just better putting the points elsewhere. It's not that Blood Hex is bad with him, there just is maybe better options, depending on how you want to play. There's the standard upgrades on this. Hemophilia, reduce the target's physical debuff resist by 10%. Short syllables, reduce the cooldown by 1. Bad Blood, increase duration by 1. And Black Blood, increase the hex intensity by 50%. If you do choose to take Blood Hex, honestly, just pick whatever you normally pick for it, and you'll probably be fine with it. I pretty much never pick it, so there isn't much advice I can give on this in terms of what I think works best when you're using this ability on him. Next up, though, is going to be a very rare skill. Not many units have access to this, and Teleport. It's part of what makes him very strong at what he does. Best mobility ability in the game, with the upgrades on it: 2-turn cooldown, 1 AP cost, range of 10. Just absolutely phenomenal for repositioning either offensively, like I mentioned before, to assassinate, those enemy backline, or moving to defensive positions to help protect your own party. Time Shift, this is a must-have on this. Reduce the cost by 1, bring it down to 1. Astral Journey is not something I really ever bother to pick up. 5 HP is a bit more meaningful with him if you choose to take him as a tank kind of role, but it's just too little. I'm not really a fan of it. Far Reach, increase the range by 2, bringing this up to 10. And then Shadowgate, the hero arrives at the target place hidden, so if you're going with the assassin playstyle, this will be useful because then you can get the surprise bonus on an attack. Another standard Arcanist ability with magical armor. You're definitely going to want this on him no matter what kind of playstyle you choose to go with. It's just so good. It provides amazing tankiness to every Arcanist that picks this up. 29 armor. That will dissuade enemies from choosing to hit him in the first place a lot of the time, just because they'll see how much armor they have and they'll know they'll do basically no damage to him. And it has 29 because of this upgrade here of reinforced armor, plus 12. Resisted injury, grants an injury token. I never really bother with this. Extended armor, so now it lasts for 2 attacks instead of 1, which is very good. And enchanted armor, just 5 armor applied to his base armor. I've kind of alluded before how he can kind of play a tank role, and if you're going to be using the tank role, then this 5 armor is going to be very helpful. If you're choosing to go more assassin playstyle, this is still good, but maybe there's something else you may want to put a skill point towards elsewhere. This is good either way, but definitely sort of, I'd say, mandatory if you're going with the tank option. Extra damage for 10% more weapon damage. Skirmisher, another unique ability for him, lets him wear medium armor, which really helps him take on that assassin or tank kind of playstyle. And Master Alchemist, extra 50% on potions. I never bother picking this one up. Moving into Tier 2, we have Slowing Hex, another standard Arcanist ability. It has a base cost of 2, but you can reduce this down to 1 through a couple different ways, such as with this upgrade of Witchcraft. Slowing Hex, reduced by 1. You can also pick up a vulnerability on this, 10%. So now when you slow the target, they will also take some extra damage. And this is helpful if you're going Assassin playstyle. Mark them with your Slowing Hex before, attacking them, and maybe that 10% will make a difference in getting the kill. Fatigue increases the duration by 1, and Mass Hex turns it into a 3x3 AoE, which does synergize fairly well with the vulnerability, because now you can apply vulnerability to up to 9 enemies if they're all bunched up super tightly. But if you're okay with losing on a pretty large portion of Slowing Hex's intensity, then go ahead and go for it. Now, while he doesn't have Force Bolt as his basic attack like other Arcanists, he still does have access to Force Bolt, and just like standard Force Bolt, it doesn't have a cooldown. 10 range on this, 6 AP cost. It's the exact same ability, really. It's just moved into Tier 2. It's optional. And honestly, I do like taking this because I like being able to fall back to a ranged option if maybe I'm not using him to engage with someone in melee at the moment. So it's a good fallback skill, so I take the base skill for just that reason, and don't really bother putting skill points into the upgrades. But it does have the basic upgrades of Piercing Bolt, plus 10% armor break, Damned Prey, if they're hexed, they take 20% extra damage, Mind Game, if you kill someone with it, you get an AP back, and multiple targets, you can now split it into 3 bolts. This is definitely more of a thing that is useful if you want to try and maybe knock back 3 separate targets. If you're trying to maximize damage, this isn't really the way to go. You're better off putting the skill point elsewhere. He does also have Master of Hexes, like the other Arcanists, plus 25% hex intensity. I don't really use hexes on him a whole lot. He only has 2 instead of 3. He is missing Death Hex in Tier 3, so I just don't think this is really worth it because, as you can see, the way I like to play him, I only ever take Slowing Hex, so this seems like a lot of skill points to invest into upgrading what's effectively just one other skill. If you find yourself using Slowing Hex and Blood Hex, then maybe this is helpful for you, but if you're only using one or the other, I would probably avoid this one and just boost your Faerie Knight's other abilities. It has the standard upgrades of Ancestral Hex for another 10% hex intensity, Corrupted Armor, so now you can get a little extra armor burn, and Quick Casting, reduce the cost of your hexes by 1 AP, and Power of Hexes, 5% extra damage for each active hex. There may be some combo potential here where you take this just for Power of Hexes if you're using the 3x3 Mass Hex on Slowing Hex. Saying that word a lot. Maybe this could give you a pretty big boost in damage if you're going Assassin playstyle. It's something to sort of play around with. Now getting to his first sort of unique ability in Tier 2, as far as Arcanists go at least, he has Ice Shield. Strongest defensive ability in the game, probably. 3 Ice Plates, blocks 3 attacks, super cheap, has pretty good duration and a decent cooldown. It says range of 2, which is kind of irrelevant because he can only cast it on himself. With the upgrades of Rhyme Breath, reduce the cooldown by 1, bringing it down to 4. With Lasting Ice, increase the duration by 1, bringing the duration up to 4, so if they don't burn through all your ice shields, you can just chain them one after another. Elemental Ice, reduce the cost by 1, so now it only costs 1, which is phenomenal. And Glacial Aegis, an extra ice plate, so now it can block up to 4 attacks. Just lots of 4s. Lasts for 4 turns, 4-turn cooldown, can block 4 attacks. Absolutely amazing. Great for either of the playstyles that Faerie Knight really excels at. I think it's probably going to be burned through much more quickly if you choose to go the tank option, because you're kind of putting him in position to take more hits. But as an assassin, it's a good safety maneuver in case, an archer tries to shoot at you since you're out in the open and away from the party. With long reach, the range of non-melee active skills increases by 1, so extra range to, things like Force Bolt, for example, or Slowing Hex. It's definitely useful to pick up, for sure. Dodge, 15% dodge, just adds some more survivability to him. He isn't like a defender, so he can be fairly tanky and can tank, but since he doesn't have block, dodge is kind of what helps keep him within a decent survivability range. Not quite as good as defenders, but dodge can definitely go a long way on him. As we get into tier 3, we get Fire Blast. The only other hero in the game who has this, I believe, is Ector, and it's kind of interesting seeing this in tier 3. It doesn't really feel like a tier 3 skill, but Faerie Knight's such a weird character. Honestly, Fire Blast is still a good pick to have. AoE is always useful, so just having this as sort of a backup AoE, I think is worth taking a lot of the time. For AP cost, 3-turn cooldown, range of 10, 3x3 AoE, 70% weapon damage. And the upgrades on it, just like Ector, are good ones. With Earth Scorcher, leaves a patch of fire on the ground for some extra damage. With Firestarter, it can actually apply burning for some extra damage. And with Conflagration, you reduce the cost by 1, bringing it down to 4. And then Searing Impact, 50% extra damage to the center target. If you're looking for some extra AoE, definitely something you may want to pick up with either of the playstyles. More AoE is always helpful. Honestly, it really is. Next up for his passive, he actually has a champion passive with melee expertise. The base ability is kind of but if you're going tank style, it does grant him some extra unbreakable armor and debuff resistances, so this will have some uptime and it can help for sure. But he gets Killing Spree, so this is actually pretty good. He can, chain off some kills, not quite as easily as a champion because his damage potential isn't as high, but free swings are free swings. So I would definitely take this because it's free damage no matter how you choose to play him. With Combat Specialist, just extra damage if he is outnumbered, 5% per target. Heat of Battle, if he's outnumbered, he gets extra AP for each enemy above 2. This one I think is probably going to come up more often with the tank style rather than the assassin. And then Overdrive, reduce cooldowns by 1. This may be helpful since he does not have Mindstorm, but most of the time I find yourself mostly using Teleport and his melee attacks, which have pretty low cooldowns to begin with, so I don't know how much you'll need this. With Spell Resistance, reduce incoming damage from spells by 25%. I've never found myself really needing this, but if your Faerie Knight's getting messed up by enemy spellcasters, this may be something you want to take. The upgrades on it are pretty good all around. Flameborn grants immunity to burning, probably the weakest of them. Protection is another 10% damage reduction to enemy spells. Mental Fort is more mental debuff resistance. And Ancient Ward fully negate the effects of the first incoming spell for each encounter, so it's just a freebie. Someone tries to shoot him with like a Thunderbolt, for example, you just say nah. For his last active skill, we have another unique ability for him, and that is going to be Force Cleave. And it has 2 range, because we'll get to that in a second, and it's 100% weapon damage and causes knockback, and it's basically Cleave, as the same targeting mechanic as Cleave, but provides a knockback and is a bit more expensive. 1 turn cooldown, so you can use it every turn, and with the damage upgrade here of Rending Cleave, 10% extra damage. Dominance, apply 20% vulnerability, so it's a good opener. Feebleness, apply weakness, so this makes it into a good defensive utility as well, so if maybe your party's getting run up on, use this to create space, and also they'll do less damage on their next turn. And with Flowing Cleave, reduce the cooldown by 1, which gives it that 1 turn cooldown. For the passives, we have a couple of standard ones, such as Spell Power, and this increases the range of all skills by 1, and their damage by 10%. That is why his Lightning Strike and his Force Cleave have a range of 2. Even though they are melee skills, because of Spell Power, he has a range of 2 on them, so that includes things like Overwatch, so now all of a sudden you can be stabbing enemies from extra distance. It's pretty helpful in a lot of cases, and just really strong, honestly. Saves you a lot of AP on movement, and you'd just be surprised how often that extra range on your melee really comes into play. This is probably a must-have on Faerie Knight just because of how great it synergizes with the fact that he is a hybrid unit. So it's not just range spells, it's also his melee abilities that get a bonus from this. He has another dodge, which you're definitely going to want to take, help boost up his tankiness, and then strong-willed for 30% more mental debuff resistance. And that is everything that Faerie Knight has to offer. And I hope I wasn't too confusing talking about maybe use this for this playstyle, this for that playstyle. A lot of people who play Faerie Knight who have experience with him, it's pretty obvious, and for players picking him up for the first time, you'll quickly realize, wow, he's actually really tanky. I could use him as a substitute for a defender, and other people who want to use him more offensively, they can use him as an assassin, just go picking off enemies in the backline. So those are sort of the two main roles he fills in for most players, so I wanted to kind of address that as I was talking about how I kind of view some of these abilities and how good I think they may be for general use. If you're curious to see how this kind of works in action, because maybe I'm not making the most sense, I actually have a build video you can watch on that, sort of showcasing his tankiness, his defensive playstyle. I'll link that in the description, and that's all I got for you. I hope this was helpful for any players out there, and if you made it to the end of the video, thank you for watching, and I hope to see you in the next one.